Good evening from the News Radio, 1120 a.m. and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I'm Bill London, and I need a haircut. All right, I do the wake-up call, 6 a.m. to 9 on KPNW, streaming live and worldwide online at kpnw.com. And your crazy news from Oregon brought to you by none other than Sean Sutherland, who focuses on Medicare and Medicaid and folks who have problems figuring it all out. That's why his company is called Ask Insurance, because you call him and you ask him. Now, for instance, this is the international sign for, I need to ask a question. So you may get, of course, a copy of your insurance and you're going through it and you don't really understand it. So you need to ask Sean. Other times you find out your claim has been rejected and your initial response is, and then it turns into something like, and that's when you really need to ask Sean Sutherland, because Sean, here he is, Sean will help answer all of those questions for you. It's what he's about and it's what he does. And he has great customer service. So when you have one of these, you need to call him. All right. So and by the way, it's nice to know that we're spending so much money on graphics. We now have a special effects budget. All right. Here's a look at the news. Well, this isn't really from Oregon, but it is news today, and that is we have a new pope, or you have a new pope. Well, regardless, there's a new one of those. And for the first time ever, it happens to be somebody from the United States of America, and that would be Cardinal Robert Prevost, who has taken on the name Leo XIV. He's a Chicago-born missionary who spent most of his career ministering in Peru. And he took over the Vatican's powerful office of bishops after that, and today he was elected Pope. The first time that a Pope from the United States has been a Pope in the 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church. And while being from the U.S., he actually does have dual citizenship, both here and also in Peru. And it could be that dual citizenry may have helped him. Now, the prevailing narrative has always been that cardinals would never choose a pope from the U.S. because of what's considered the United States, shall we say, outsized influence in the world, financially, militarily, politically. But he also spent quite a bit of time, as I said, in Peru. And with South America being an area where the church continues to see growth, that may have helped quite a bit. Plus, Catholicism in the United States has actually been on the decline for a number of years. So the cardinals in the conclave may have looked at this as a way to, well, we can shore up the base and maybe expand it in the United States. In his first words, Leo said, "Peace be with you," and empathized a message of peace, dialogue, and missionary evangelicalism. Now, he spoke to the crowd in both English and Spanish, not in English. So the question is, well, okay, who is this guy and what does he represent? Well, Prevost was the head of the church's dicastery of bishops, obviously, meaning that he oversaw the selection of new bishops. Overall, he's considered to be a centrist, but on a lot of social issues, he's seen as progressive, embracing marginalized groups, kind of like his predecessor, Pope Francis, who championed migrants and the poor. But Prevost also opposes ordaining women as deacons, for instance, so he's seen at least as a conservative on the church doctrine side, and he's also relatively young, 69 years old. All right, so now to the crazy Oregon stuff. Police arrested 5 people Monday during a protest at Portland State University against Riley Gaines, who was speaking at an event there on campus. Now, in case you don't know who Riley Gaines is, she's a female athlete, and she was on campus to talk about how she believes transgender women shouldn't be playing on women's sports teams. Now, at about 7 p.m. Monday evening, personnel with PSU's campus public safety office called the Portland Police Department and said said they needed help bad with crowd control outside the Smith Memorial Union, where the event, which, by the way, was not affiliated with the university, was taking place. And over the course of the next hour and a half, Portland police officers arrested 5 individuals for a number of crimes. Now, police say that Portland State University requested their help after a crowd of people started trying to kick the doors into the building where the speech and the gathering was taking place. Protesters take issue with Gaines, talking about how she believes that transgender women should not be playing against genetic women and that they shouldn't be on women's sports teams. Now, Gaines herself is actually a 12-time NCAA All-American swimmer who is speaking out, particularly after competing against a transgender swimmer. During the event, Gaines said, "What we saw was this mediocre man," and that's generous, actually, she said, "a less than average male swimmer competing at the Division I level in his rightful category. The men's category was ranking in the 400s and 500s the year prior. Just 12 months later, after he came out and said that he was a woman, he was dominating." She says, "I mean, not just number one, but dominating." A spokesperson for the university said in a statement that PSU is a public institution that supports free speech and free expression, even when the views expressed run counter to the beliefs and values held by other individuals in the community. They further said, as a public institution, the university has to stay neutral. Well, it was a record drug bust, one of the biggest busts in U.S. history. And as part of it, the feds arrested a man in Salem, Oregon, the state's capital, whom they say is the leader, or at least was, of a multi-state drug trafficking operation that was tied to the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. Now, during the investigation, officials say they seized in Salem alone 880 pounds of fentanyl, almost $3 million, as well as hundreds of thousands of dollars in jewelry and a pair of cars. Heriberto Salazar Amaya is accused of leading the drug trafficking ring that is tied to the Sinaloa cartel that was operating in 5 states, including New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, and the like. And he's one of more than a dozen people charged in the operation. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi says that Salazar Amaya is in the U.S. illegally. As a matter of fact, according to court documents, he'd actually been deported previously from the U.S. twice, in 2010 and 2012. Bondi said that she vows to hold him and the others involved accountable. She said, "He's the leader. He's the number one guy. And I want him to stay in our prisons as long as possible." She said, "I have no desire to send him or them back to Mexico because they're coming across our border illegally." She said of the bust, no longer will they be able to do that, but the amount of drugs, the amount of money, the amount of weapons most of these individuals have convicted will remain in American prisons for a long time. Perhaps, in her words, Alcatraz. Salazar Amaya faces dozens of criminal charges, including conspiracy to distribute fentanyl and violating U.S. immigration laws. According to the DEA, the Sinaloa cartel is one of Mexico's oldest criminal organizations, and it's also considered to be one of the most violent and the most prolific of the drug trafficking cartels in the world. The State Department declared the Sinaloa cartel a foreign terrorist organization earlier this year. So here's a question. Why was the leader of this group in Oregon? Well, probably for a lot of reasons. One, Oregon's lax drug laws. Remember, we were the first state to decriminalize all hard drugs and last year barely recriminalized them. And Oregon is a sanctuary state, meaning if you're here illegally, Oregon will not ask, they will not tell, nor will they aid any law enforcement agency trying to find you. One of our emailers this morning made a sardonic point, asking, How long until they start calling Salazar Amaya Oregon Dad? Incidentally, Oregon Republicans did jump all over this. Representative Jeff Helfrich says, why is it anytime Oregon is number one in something, it's always bad? Oh, he's noticed too. He further went on to say, first in homelessness, then in addiction, and now apparently first in attracting international drug cartels. He says, while this massive drug bust is a law enforcement victory, it's a damning indictment of our state's failed leadership. It's the direct result of the soft-on-crime, pro-illegal immigration policies that the majority party has forced on Oregon for decades. Now, his comments were echoed by many others in the state, except for Oregon's Democratic leaders. The governor, our attorney general, who should have had an invested interest, and also our legislative leaders have been completely, totally silent. Oh, remember former Secretary of State Shemia Fagan? She was the gal that, as Secretary of State of Oregon, said, oh, I'm not making enough as Secretary of State, and my $80,000 a year doesn't go far enough. So, yeah, I took a $10,000 a month job, well, working for a large pot company, LaModa. $10,000 a month as a consultant while being the Secretary of State, and also doing audits of the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission, where, of course, Rosa Cesaris, one of the owners of LaModa, was telling her the things that they needed to audit. All right, well, finally, she has now agreed to pay $1,600 in civil fines to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission for using her position to obtain that $10,000 a month side job with the pot company, LaModa, who, by the way, owed over $10 million in back taxes to the state and to the feds. And at this point, it's not known whether any of that money has actually been paid or not. So they're also asking for reimbursement because, yeah, when she would go to events on the road in her state capacity, she actually asked and got roomier accommodations so she could take her kids and their dog. Fagan signed the final order, spelling out the settlement last week. Fagan defended her actions but agreed to the settlement, noting, quote, the expense of continuing to obtain legal counsel to contest these matters was just too much. Also, our friend Fagan just got her law license reinstated. And in case you're wondering who's on the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, well, they're all appointees appointed by Oregon's governor. So, following up on a story that we reported, I don't know, this is probably going back almost 2 months. Grants Pass Republican Representative Dwayne Junker is under investigation now in the Oregon House under what's known as House Rule 27. It prohibits harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. And when you hear that, you think, wow, he sexually harassed somebody? Or maybe the guy's racist? Or maybe he did something really mean to somebody because he was mad at them in retaliation? Well, I'll let you decide. So Junker actually gave a speech on the floor of the House, which we reported, in opposition to Senate Bill 1098, which aims to restrict and all but do away with book bans in Oregon schools. Now, that bill was crafted by the ACLU of Oregon, and it was also supported by the Oregon Library Association and Basic Rights Oregon. That is an LGBTQ lobbying and activist group, all supporters of Senate Bill 1098. Now, Junker's crime was reading a scene from the 2016 book The Haters, which was challenged in the Three Rivers School District, that's in his district, but ultimately is still on school shelves. Now, Junker opened his speech by saying a parent from his local school district had protested The Haters at a school board meeting after the Three Rivers School District rejected her challenge of the book. The book for adolescents is about three teenage boys who meet at a jazz camp and then run away on a sex-charged tour. The reading caused outrage among Democrats on the House floor who tried to stop Younker's reading from the book where one boy is giving oral sex to another. Both Democrats in the House and one Republican, Kevin Mannix, finally were able to shut the reading down. Now, the complaint against Younker states that one complaint was made by a partisan staff member and another by a nonpartisan staffer who both reported that his comments created a hostile work environment under Rule 27, which prohibits harassment, discrimination, and retaliation in the state capitol. Younker responded that the material described as creating a hostile work environment is content that legislators want to prevent parents from shielding their children from in schools. In essence, a book which is considered appropriate for middle schoolers is apparently too lascivious and licentious to be heard by adults in the legislature. So, another epic failure by Oregon's Department of Human Services. This time, the state is agreeing to pay nearly $5 million to three children who were severely neglected and tortured by their great-aunt over 5 years, despite more than 20 complaints made to DHS and reports by their teachers, by counselors, and by other child welfare workers and mandatory reporters. Merlinda Avalos is 56, and she was sentenced in 2019 to 12 years and 7 months in prison after pleading guilty to 6 counts of first-degree criminal mistreatment in Washington County Circuit Court. So this settlement was reached after lengthy mediation and legal wrangling by the state against these 3 kids. And the mediation was done with the help of 2 retired state judges, as the state has fought this case tooth and nail. Now, the children were not in the care of the state at the time of the abuse, but the state was told about it numerous times, over 20, by numerous people, and they refused to investigate. So what did they refuse to investigate? Well, the children suffered from chronic starvation. They were deprived of sleep and forced to urinate in pee jugs in their rooms at night. They were prevented from using the bathroom, had their mouths regularly duct taped closed, and were repeatedly hit with a variety of objects, including fly swatters, a broom handle, belts, and a wooden spoon. Avalos also made the children attend school in urine-drenched clothes, restricted showers to once a week, every Sunday, only with cold water, and forced the children to sleep naked without blankets on bare mattresses on the floor of their bedroom with the windows open regardless of the weather outside. She also kicked them, choked them, and repeatedly shot them in the back with BB guns. Neighbors, school staff, and other mandatory reporters made over 20 reports to the State Department of Human Services between April of 2013 and April of 2018. Now, at the time, the 2 girls were 5 and the boy was 7. They were finally removed from Avalos's home by the state once law enforcement got involved. Oh, and by the way, that $5 million actually won't be going to 3 children because the brother, who was 7 when all of this started, committed suicide. Attorneys for 10 new sexual assault victims filed a lawsuit Wednesday against, the state of Oregon and the Oregon Youth Authority. The lawsuit calls OYA's top doctor, Edward Gary Edwards, nicknamed Dr. Coldfingers, a ringleader who facilitated and actually sexually abused children at McLaren for decades. Now, McLaren is a correctional institute for young boys. Attorneys say their clients want the state to address systemic changes so children won't have to experience what they refer to as years of inappropriate actions by the doctor. They say those actions went unchecked and overlooked. Kendall Spinella, an attorney for the Jancy law firm, says these cases aren't about one bad guy who did bad things. They're cases about institutions of leaders, professionals, and staff members who should have been looking out for these kids and failed them. Continuing, something at OIA needs to change one way or another, quote unquote, because another bad person will come into these positions of power and do the exact same thing to the next generation of kids. Now, I think we told you about another lawsuit that was brought against the state and the OIA back in March. Another 10 boys accusing Edwards of sexually abusing them. And what came out in that suit, or at least has been put forward as evidence, is that the individuals inside McLaren knew what Edwards was doing, and that Dr. Coldfingers was actually used as a threat by those overseeing the young boys at McLaren, where if they were acting up, those people who were supposed to be watching them actually threatened to take the kids to, quote, Dr. Coldfingers. And I'm not even going to go through all the different things that Edwards accused of doing. Yeah, that's a look at your crazy Oregon news. And remember, when your insurance makes you say, and it's Medicare or Medicaid, you need to call Sean Sutherland because he'll help you figure it all out. All you have to do is call him at Ask Insurance, and you're going to get some answers. And then you'll smile. All right, Rick, there it is. So why don't you go ahead and roll out a big old drum of reel?